I'd like to talk now about the PHAA requirement for writing for every year of high school as part of the English credit. Again, some people kind of wonder, why did we put this sort of requirement in? What was our rationale? And what counts as meeting these requirements? Our basic requirement states that students have to show in the portfolio every year that they're going to show to their PHAA evaluator, they have to show at least 4 finished compositions, not rough drafts, finished compositions, and one of them has to be at least 2,500 words long. Some people still call this long paper the 10-page paper. That was the original wording in our requirements. I think we said 10 pages or 2,500 words. When we first started our program, not everybody had computers and not everybody had the ability to count their words in a document. Some kids would be writing this by hand. That's not the case anymore, by and large. But we quickly, after a couple of years, we changed that wording completely and dropped out the 10-page paper wording because I had an evaluation student, a charming, wonderful, delightful girl who was a freshman, and she said to me innocently at her meeting with me that, "Oh gosh, Mrs. Richman, I was really worried about writing this 10-page paper. I didn't know how I would do it, but I found it's really easy because you just make the font really big and the margins really wide, and it was easy." And so we realized that, okay, it's not 10 pages, it's 2,500 words, count your words. Our rationale here was we wanted students to have experience with a wide range of types of writing throughout their high school years. We felt it was important for students to go beyond just short answers, workbooks, fill in the blank type of education. We wanted students to also be required to do some real writing. At the same time, we wanted, like with all of our requirements, we wanted to be open-ended. We didn't want to be mandating exactly what type of writing students had to do. We wanted to mandate the quantity. I know that we don't exactly say how long the other 3 compositions, which presumably would be shorter than 2,500 words, would be. A rule of thumb, if people need one, might be at least 500 words, which would be a typical type of length for an essay a student might write for a college class or an advanced placement class. I've been gratified over the years to see how students have met this requirement in really meaningful ways. First, many students go way beyond 4 compositions. They might have a dozen, 2 dozen strong essays, original writings in their portfolio. Some people have 4 really good quality papers. They really take it seriously to polish these 4 required ones up to a really high level. Again, I'm seeing that many homeschool groups that are offering co-op classes are requiring writing of their students, and I think this is valuable. Again, they know that students may be needing to meet a writing requirement for our diploma program. There are many classes offered that are helping kids write a research paper or helping kids write some longer piece of writing. And speaking of research paper, we do have in our PHAA guidelines that if a family wants to meet a requirement in, say, science or social studies, one of their ways of meeting that requirement could be to show that they wrote a major research paper related to that subject area. Maybe related to astronomy, maybe related to biology, maybe related to the history of World War II. If a student writes a research paper with at least 3 sources that are not encyclopedia type resources, that paper can count for earning credit rather than counting days, logged days, or finishing a textbook. Now, they're obviously going to be putting some time into this paper. This should not be a paper that a student does in 2 days just to meet a requirement. This should be something they've put time, thought, and effort into over the years. This does not mean, though, that the 10-page paper must be a research paper. Many people like to have their students have a research paper opportunity, and I think that's an excellent idea. We don't mandate that it be so. I remember one year I had a student who was a ballet dancer, and this was a boy. He went on to become a professional ballet person with the Pittsburgh Ballet, and pretty soon he was teaching for them, and he still is now. He met this requirement for writing the longer paper by writing a fictional story. He started in his 9th grade year, and by the senior year, he practically had a novel. He continued the story each year. And that was fine. That was a way for him, writing a research paper. He didn't feel it would be meaningful for his educational goals. But a long fictional story he could really get into, and it was very, very good. And so we want to assure people that there are a variety of ways that families can meet this 2,500 word paper. There have been some very good papers that were personal narratives. One of my favorites was a student who was not an academically oriented student. In fact, he was very dyslexic, and that was the reason his family had started homeschooling. When he was a high school student, his family realized early on that he had a marked interest in carpentry, building, and they got him jobs with various carpenters in their area, home builders in their area. And in his senior year, he was really doing what could only be described as an internship with a builder in his area. The minute he had his diploma, he was working full-time for that contractor. And his big paper that year was a photo essay describing the building of a house from the very first steps up to the finished home, ready for sale. It was a wonderful paper. It showed what he had done, what he had learned, the whole process. I learned a lot from it. And this was something that was accessible to him, even as a student who found anything related to the language arts pretty difficult. By the way, he also met our 25 book requirement that year readily, because he finally discovered one of the Louis L'Amour, one of the great Western writers, and he read 25 Louis L'Amour books, and I counted those as his classics. So when a student is writing about a topic that's meaningful for them, even if they're an academically challenged student, they can often do a quite remarkable job. Students have also written major personal narrative papers about, say, a missions trip they had gone on with their church group that really changed their life, maybe changed their direction in life. And this is another type of really meaningful paper that they'll treasure looking back on. Other students have written meaningful papers about interviews they did with a grandparent. I've had this is a little bit different, but students who did a major interview with a grandparent for my Advanced Placement U.S. History course. I teach homeschoolers all over the country. And that year, that spring, that grandparent died. They were very grateful. They'd written about this. Now it was something tangible that the family could keep and enjoy and learn from for years into the future. It became something very meaningful. I've also seen students who sometimes begin homeschooling because they have some sort of very difficult chronic illness. And I've seen students use that as a topic for their big paper. They've researched the illness. They've researched what are the different ways to approach it. What are the ways that have helped? What is the latest information about it? And they've used that as the topic of their paper. And again, that was a very meaningful way I felt to meet this requirement. Again, like with all of our PHAA requirements, if a student has special needs or has some real limitations in literacy, this requirement can be adapted to be suitable for that student. Some of these adaptations could be things like dictating the paper to an adult who would then write it down for them, writing a series of shorter papers that weren't as long as 500 words and that certainly weren't as long as 2,500, but that all together would still add up to a major body of work for the year, but they would be shorter. Often these adaptations are done especially in the early years of high school, and by the senior year, the student may have enough confidence that they can take more initiative and work with more independence on the paper themselves. So there are many ways to meet this requirement, many topics that can be written about, many ways of writing, and it's a real delight to evaluators to see the type of variety that students come up with. And I've heard from many students that when they got to college and they were asked to write an essay, it's due this Friday, it was not overwhelming to them. And I think it's a good requirement. Enjoy it.